Paul Barrow wrote, at the rate of which South Africa is now expanding, the term miracle is likely to be appropriate to its development over the next few years. So the expectations were that at the next few years, South Africa, under the policy of separate development, apartheid would be in a very strong position against any economic or military threat. It was plain that in these circumstances, South Africa was poised to become the dominating and unifying force in Southern Africa against the British-American-supported terrorist onslaught on the Portuguese territories of Mozambique and Angola and on Rhodesia and Southwest Africa. The powerful rise of South Africa can counter the British-American plans for this region, which were primarily to break the white political power in each of these territories and prevent the consolidation of whites over territorial boundaries against British-American objectives. It is well to recall that, for instance, the Frelimo terrorists received substantial financial support from the Ford Foundation of the USA, acting most likely as a front for the CIA and the State Department, and that the ANC, while banned in South Africa, had its head office in London, and almost every communist who left South Africa for safer ground did not go to the Kremlin but to London. And unquestionably the anti-apartheid movement, more correctly the anti-Afrikaner movement, in Britain was a British Secret Service operation against South Africa. Not forgetting that the US and Britain in the act of war already in 1961 instituted an arms boycott against South Africa, and that the USA was behind Liberia and the Ethiopia application to the International Court in 1961 to break Southwest Africa's ties with South Africa. Notwithstanding the British and American influence in international affairs, South Africa was growing stronger and stronger. Are there any questions before I carry on? Doesn't seem so. Okay, let's carry on.
You're doing great, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you. Time magazine of August 26, 1966, 11 days before the assassination of Dr. Verwoerd, wrote, South Africa is in the midst of a massive boom. Attracted by cheap labor, a gold-backed currency, and high profits, investors from all over the world have plowed money into the country, and the new industries that they have started have spent production, consumption, and the demand for labor soaring. Such are the proportions of prosperity. Certainly a remarkable admission by this publication, well known for its bias towards the Verwoerd government. In the same vein, a political opponent of Dr. Verwoerd, Jan Botha, in his book Verwoerd is Dead, wrote, by the time he died, Dr. Verwoerd had built his own monument, which was there for all to see, the Republic of South Africa. The white people had been forged together in unity. The country was military strong and resilient. The police and security forces were effectively dealing with all attempts at subversion and infiltration. The country's economy was dynamic, expanding, and became largely self-sufficient. In the history of South Africa, his name will live forever as the leader who, when his country was threatened with internal disorder and with economic sanctions, boycotts, and open aggression from overseas, stood as a symbol of defiance and the will and determination to survive. It was evident that the British-American tactics had failed and that the direct opposite of what they were trying to achieve was actually taking place. Apartheid versus integration. The problem facing the British and American power brokers was not only the rising power of the South African state in the Southern African context, but also the demonstrable success of a government following a policy of separate development, apartheid, as opposed to the glaring failure of the policies of racial integration espoused by the British and American enemies of Dr. Verwoerd and his government. An article in the Afrikaans Sunday newspaper report of the 22nd May 1994 was most revealing in this respect, dealing with the anticipated decision for the return of South Africa to the Commonwealth after the April 27 election. The author Jack Verweers said that if F.W. de Klerk would be a party to such a decision, it would remove a large part of the hate from the view held by a considerable number of influential Britons on Afrikaans. This animosity is seldomly acknowledged fact, the usual thing being to accuse the Afrikaners of still fighting the Boer War. The article reads further, the attitude of the Brits, particularly the mandarins of the British Foreign Office, who were in the vanguard of the fight against the national government, was explained to me by an equally influential Brit, Lord Deeds, former editor of the Daily Telegraph. So the British government was fighting the South African government, a continuation by other means of the Boer War. Lord Deeds said that in the eyes of these Brits, South Africans and especially Afrikaans speakers had made two big mistakes. One, to leave the Commonwealth and addition to survive. This constitutes the height of spite and envy, implying that these Britons had hoped that South Africa would not survive, with all the dire consequences for the entire population. Only a deep-seated and incurable animosity could produce such sentiments. What followed this remarkable admission by Lord Deeds is even more remarkable. While South Africa grew to become the economic giant of the continent, the other members of the Commonwealth virtually sank into poverty. This was the complete opposite of what they had hoped, that South Africa under an Afrikaner government with a policy of apartheid and no relations with the Commonwealth should have become economic giant of Africa, was making the British Foreign Office and the US State Department to think what they had thought was unthinkable. And what made this even worse was the countries following policies opposed to that of South Africa's apartheid was sinking into poverty.